Good.
You're coming in to speak about the
20 years worth of stuff in the classroom. Like, that's fun. Over here, the lady in the back.
Hello. Wonderful. Oh.
yes,
Community,
right.
part of the committee. Oh, how I know that name. Baseball picture. No, it was the father-son thing that was
Got his mom's here. He's really lucky to get mom's.
basketball. high schooler. Baby.
Right. You never know if the lights go out. Bang theory. Commission speak.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Reynoldsburg City Council meeting of June 28th, 2021. The time is now 6:32, and I would like to call this meeting to order. I am Council President Angie Jenkins. Welcome to Reynoldsburg City Council meeting this evening. At this time, we will have the invocation. Please stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance following the invocation. Councilmember Lawson Rowe will lead us in the invocation. Good evening. Dear Heavenly Father, you are the God of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We thank you for your unyielding grace and presence. Father, we thank you for your presence in our hearts, minds, and souls as we proceed in the business of your city government. We ask that you share your discernment as we discuss the goings-on of your community's business. Allow us to see your face in each other and our neighbors. Please keep us close to you in all we do. Father, we know your way is perfect, and we will continue to seek your guidance in all we do to lift up the city of Respect. These and all blessings we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Bryant, Councilmember Strickland,
Present.
Councilmember Salvati,
Here.
Councilmember Pacquiao,
Here.
Councilmember Lawson Rowe,
Here.
Councilmember Codner,
Here.
Councilmember Baker, President Jenkins.
Here. Next, we'll have the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? The agenda is approved as submitted. Next, we'll have the approval of minutes. Approval of City Council regular meeting minutes of June 14, 2021. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, the minutes stand approved as submitted. Next, we'll have community comments. The community comments portion of the meeting is an opportunity for citizens to address council. Citizens may bring matters to the attention of City Council or discuss items on the agenda. Before addressing City Council, members of the public are asked to complete a speaker's form and give it to the clerk. The council president will invite speakers to step to the microphone, give their name and address. All remarks should be addressed to council as a whole and not exceed 3 minutes. Are there any comments from the public?
Stephen Castro.
Hi, I'm Steve Castro, 110 Scenic Road. So I'm on the street where we had an issue with dogs and one of the neighbors passed away, and now we have a condemned house that's kind of bringing down the neighborhood after they had like over 40 dogs. So I know you'll be talking about dog limits tonight. I want to express support for a limit on dogs. I don't want to take away people's rights to have pets, but I think that there's reasonable restrictions, especially on residential. I specifically want to focus on suburban residential. If your house is 20 feet away from someone else's house and they have dozens of dogs, then you're going to hear barking a lot. And when there's lots of feces being shoveled out into the garbage can, to where I've seen the video of the garbage man who couldn't even lift it. They left it there because it smelled so bad he couldn't even take it. And this is a garbage worker who's used to dealing with garbage. So obviously the smells are disturbing. I would say disturbing the comfort of other people. And so I don't want to take away someone's freedoms, but I think it's infringing on the freedoms to enjoy the peace of your own property when the sounds and smells are kind of disturbing you. So the zone code has a limit of 5 dogs for a kennel. The problem is if you have more than 5 dogs and you say, oh, I'm not selling them, then technically you could say you're not a kennel, even though you are. And so I think 5 dog makes sense to kind of bring it in line with the zoning code so that you could say, well, if you're more than 5, you're probably, I don't know if you're trying to sell them or whatever, but 5 seems like a reasonable limit. I think it makes sense to bring it in line with other comparable residential areas. If you're in an agricultural zone, then fine, you got a lot more land. If you're on less than half an acre and you're right next to other people's houses, I think it creates disturbances. And also, finally, I think this is in line with the existing ordinances we have where we have ordinances against continuous barking, which disturbs the peace and causes annoyance and discomfort. We have ordinance against cruelty to animals, and when there's dozens of animals in a residential single-family home, you could argue that, there's cruelty to the animals not having enough room for exercise, which is in the ordinance. And then finally, in terms of nuisance conditions, which is one of the ordinances, it lists offensive odors, unsanitary conditions. Obviously, they were so unsanitary, they had to condemn the house, rip out the floors, rip out the walls, and it's kind of bringing down the neighborhood. It's become a liability for the city and for our neighborhood. So I do support a limit on dogs. I definitely want to hear other comments and take into consideration, what's the right number, what's the right limit, and I hope that together we can work together as a community to find something that accommodates different interests. Thanks.
Thank you.
Siobhan Ross, and I'd like to ask all the speakers to remember to speak into the microphone.
Good evening, Council, Mayor Begney. My name is Siobhan Ross. I reside at 2060 Dornbin Drive here in Reynoldsburg. Tonight, I wanted to speak a bit about the discussion that will take place later regarding an ordinance to make Juneteenth a paid holiday. Before I do that, I want to publicly thank Councilwoman Meredith Lawson-Rowe for her coordination of the Juneteenth celebration on Saturday, June 19th, along with Mayor Begney and all those involved. That celebration was a wonderful event. The community was able to gather and celebrate, and I quite enjoyed myself. So I just wanted to publicly thank her. In line with that, on June 19th, 1865, enslaved Black people in Galveston, Texas were informed that they were free. How significant, how life-changing. Juneteenth is a celebration of Black independence. And just as we honor and celebrate America being free on Independence Day on July 4th, so should we honor and celebrate the day all Black people became free in America. This day for this celebration is Juneteenth. Making Juneteenth a paid holiday for employees in the city of Reynoldsburg makes a statement loud and clear. The city of Reynoldsburg and its leadership acknowledge, respect, and honor the day of Juneteenth and the significance of this day to the Black community and the supporters thereof. Although our Reynoldsburg students will be well into their summer break on June the 19th, making Juneteenth a paid holiday acknowledges their identities and their experiences. 38% of our students in Reynoldsburg City Schools are Black students. And so honoring this day allows for family celebration and gathering during this time. So again, thank you so much for allowing me to speak tonight, and thank you for taking my words into consideration.
Thank you.
Rutland Zader.
Thank you. Good evening, President Jenkins, members of council. I have a couple of items that I'd like to address this evening. Number one, I'm not sure when or why council changed their rules that only allows the residents to speak during the public comment section. I think when they want to address an item that is specifically on the agenda, it would be more prudent to allow them to speak when that item comes up. It would also be more effective. But that's up to you. On tonight's agenda, you have a resolution to support women and minority businesses. I would like to ask if you would consider adding veterans businesses to that ordinance also, or to that resolution, excuse me. Also on tonight's agenda, there are some proposed changes to the zoning code. I would ask that you consider changing the maximum density in the medium residential to 16 units per acre. I think with the proposed changes in the height of the buildings that are going to be discussed, that would be more fitting with that zone. And lastly, since you are discussing changes to the zoning code, on page 189, section 1109.09, paragraph F, under applications, there is a document referenced as the Development Handbook. This lists a number of items that are to be included with an application. However, this was not updated when the code was updated. And as such, I've been informed by City Attorney Shook that this item is not enforceable since it was not updated. I would ask that you have the Development Director and his staff, with assistance from City Attorney Shook, update this handbook so that we can hold developers to the high standards that we expect in the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dylan Daniels.
Good evening. My name is Dylan Daniels. I am a high school teacher at Reynoldsburg High School, Summit Campus. I reside in Zanesville, 2960 Ridge Road. However, my workplace is 8579 Summit Road here in Reynoldsburg. I wanted to speak in favor of a paid holiday offered to city employees in honor of Juneteenth. Some of you may look at me and wonder why I would speak to advocate for this action to take place. I am so grateful to stand here and share my why. I have the honor to teach and lead dynamic individuals here in your city, many of which have been patiently waiting to be represented in the worldly celebrations that we annually honor. Reynoldsburg, the young people in our community have been waiting for an honor such as this, the honor of their city employees having a paid holiday off to celebrate and encourage equity, inclusion, and justice. To celebrate Juneteenth. It starts here and the celebration will grow so that in every home we recognize and honor Black history. There is no American history without Black history. Councilmen and women, you have the opportunity to engage our young people by showing them that their history is important, valued, cherished, and celebrated. Thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, Dr. Timmons.
Ladies and gentlemen of the council, Mayor. I don't have anything prepared, so it's maybe say something that will upset people, but I wanted you to know that I've been a teacher or educator in Reynoldsburg City Schools. Next year will be my 30th year. Most of that time I've lived in Reynoldsburg. I've seen this community change in demographics and wealth and all kinds of changes throughout my career. I would encourage you as well to move forward with the paid holiday for city employees for Juneteenth. I really think it's important as a white male that, and a member of this community, that you understand that this is not just a Black thing. I am embarrassed to say, as I would gather many people here when they announced Juneteenth, they had to Google what that was. And I think that is outrageous. During my doctoral studies was the first time I'd heard of Juneteenth. There are so many things that I've found out as an adult that are not accurate about history that I was told because it was whitewashed. I really think that Juneteenth is a minor thing that we can do, and I think we have a long road to go forward before we pay back what our African-American brothers and sisters have done for this nation. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Madam President, I have 2 emails from residents. The first email is from Mary Turner Stutz at 1070 Wagoner Road. In regards to pages 309 through 307 through 309 of the June 28th council meeting agenda packet regarding the Hill Road Methodist Cemetery on Wagoner Road, I respectfully urge you to seriously recommend or consider the brick and aluminum designs, only taller, as this request was made to keep vandals out of the cemetery versus the aesthetics of the design. With all the townhouses going up on Wilson Ridge soon, the cemetery needs protection. If I had my way, there would be an 8-foot chain link fence around the graveyard with barbed wire on the top that includes a locked gate requiring permission to enter, similar to the practice at the Cedar Cemetery. If chain link is cheaper than the designs presented, then I would strongly suggest you go with it. Whatever you plan to erect, it should not have an open gate for anyone to enter unless given permission and a key. The turnstile at the open entrance of the picket fence design is inviting trouble and unacceptable. This may be a historic cemetery, but there are people in this town with loved ones buried there. My great-great-grandparents are buried in the Cedar Cemetery. Their stones are vandalized before the fence was erected. My great-great-grandmother's stone is missing. In summary, please be practical. Don't pay for the expensive design that will allow vandals to desecrate the graves of our loved ones. We need to keep the vandals out. I want to personally thank the mayor for his consideration and the fact that this has been brought before City Council. She sent a second email with a photograph of a wrought iron fence with a pointed wrought iron fence, adding, I have attached a proposed design also shown above to consider if you elect to choose something fancier than a chain link fence. Please excuse the irregularities as I didn't have time to send a cleaner version, but you will all get the drift. Now you can delete the design fee off the proposal for EMH&T and save some money on the front end. And the second email is from Deanna Weed at 64 Scenic Road. I may not get through all of this one, it's rather long. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Deanna Weed, and I live at 64 Scenic Road in Blacklick. I am writing today to address the dog issues we have in our city. As the homeowner that was most impacted by the neighbors at 54 Scenic Drive, the road dog quantity issue is of great concern to me. I've been fighting this issue with the Crostons and the city since 2019. I really do not want anyone else to have to go through the same nightmare. There were many court dates with Mr. Croston and Mr. Hood back in 2019. Mr. Hood informed me that the Crostons received many fines, were told they could not have more than 5 dogs, and that they had to stop breeding. That is when the situation escalated. The Crostons moved the approximate 43 dogs at that time to the inside of their home so that we could not see exactly how many dogs they had. As you know, the final outcome in December 2020 was not a good one. Mr. Croston passed away, and that was when the city finally believed what I had been telling them all along. When Mr. Chris Shook took over as city attorney, I called him and he came out to the house to have a conversation about the situation. I gave him all the paperwork that I had, but amazingly enough, all the paperwork concerning the Crostons, Mr. Hood, and my complaints somehow just vanished. Mr. Shook told me he could not find anything concerning the Crostons or 54 Scenic Road. So I had to start all over again. Needless to say, it got me nowhere. It was like the city was just treating me like an old lady that just wanted to complain, while what I was complaining about were some serious issues. I have read in Ohio laws that to have more than 5 dogs, you must have a kennel license, and a kennel cannot be in a residential area. I know there are people out there that rescue dogs to rehome them, and people that dog sit and things like that, that's fine. If they're doing so, however, the city needs to be aware of why there are more dogs than 5 dogs in the residence at any given time and set limits to the time that residents can have more than 5 dogs at once. In summary, our city needs to take more responsibility over this issue. Trust me, it It will not be fun living next door to approximately 40 to 50 dogs and the city doing nothing about it. This is the very first year in the 6 years that I've lived here that we have been able to enjoy our backyard without the noise and horrible odor coming from next door. If you want a person to be in charge of this dog issue, it would be my pleasure to help and to work with those that are requesting it to be grandfathered in. Thank you for your time and consideration. I will say that council received copies of both these emails. That's everything.
Do we have any comments from council this evening?
May I be recognized?
Yes.
I just would like to thank Dr. Timmons and Dr. Ross and Mr. Dillon for, Mr. Daniels for coming to share about Juneteenth. I would be remiss if I did not actually publicly thank the city of Reynoldsburg and all of our neighbors for coming out and participating in our grand event that we had June 19th. I'd like to publicly thank Jennifer Clemens. She is the best events coordinator in Central Ohio, if you did not already know that. All of the advisement, care, and concern and guidance that she shared with those of us that put Juneteenth together was immeasurable. I'd like to also thank Mayor Begney and his assistant, Ms. Rosenthal, for all of their hands-on approach to Juneteenth. They actually were out early in the morning, and our mayor, as you all know, is a working mayor. He raised up his sleeves and got down and dirty with the rest of us. So thank you again, council, for all of your support. Thank you for being there, and thank you to the City of Respect.
Thank you.
Madam President, we have one more speaker.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, President Jenkins and council members. I apologize, I didn't know the protocol, but I just wanted to step up here briefly and support. I know the gentleman already spoke about the dog ordinance, and I just wanted to let you guys know that it's not an isolated incident on this abandoned property or the situation there. I live at 7333 Westleah Court in Reynoldsburg, and that's right off Lancaster in Brooks Edge. And I moved in November, and behind me and one over, so catty-corner to my backyard, they have 22 German Shepherds. And they're breeding them as well. They're backyard breeders. And I'd like to thank, actually, Attorney Chris Shook for ridding the roosters, chickens, and ducks. But the German Shepherds still remain an issue, not only a health issue. So basically, they have so many that they have 2 kiddie swimming pools that they drink from. They have a clothesline going across the back, and they chain the dogs that way. So they run back and forth, but they get tangled up, and that's when you hear them fighting, and then you can hear her saying, "Get the honey out, they're bleeding," and it's just an awful sound to hear. They get loose, they jump the fence, so everybody pretty much around doesn't bring their dogs out because they're scared of that. And then also the smell and the odor, so at this point there's no grass there, so they basically just hose the feces to the back of the fence. So that prohibits me from going to the back of my yard or anybody else around. The neighbor to the right has a beautiful perennial garden, but we can't open our windows, we can't be outside. So it really is a health issue, the flies, the smell, and the health and safety, and also the dogs. It's not fair to them as well. So I appreciate you hearing this out, but I just wanted to let you know that it's not an isolated incident. And he went through the ordinances, and you guys know the ins and outs of that, but I just wanted to support that issue as well.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Do we have any other comments from council? Do we have any comments from Mayor Begney this evening?
Thank you, Madam President, member of council. Just a few comments. Again, I do want to thank Councilwoman Meredith Lawson-Rowe, Councilwoman Jeanette Strickland, and others who helped participate in the Juneteenth celebration. I would also like to thank Councilmember Kristen Bryant for organization and dedication to the Pride Festival that was held the week prior to, as well as Parks and Rec and our community event staff for holding not only the concerts on the lawn, the Reaganomics were really good last night, as well as the music on the cul-de-sac. I'll have other comments on some issues as we move forward, but that's all I have for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other communications for this evening? Next, we'll move on to our motions, which is item 9 on our agenda. A motion to approve the Economic Development Transfer Permit Trex for Los Pinos Mexican Grill LLC. Attorney Shook, do you have any comments?
Council President, this is an application that is presented to this council because the city currently has a maximum number of liquor permits in the city. And the state does have a mechanism by which an applicant could seek an additional liquor license over and above that maximum number for a quote-unquote economic development opportunity. And that is what this applicant has presented. The process with the state does require that the municipality in which the application is made must support and identify the business venture as a quote-unquote economic development opportunity. You obviously have the information in front of you that was presented, and I do believe that the deputy chief has a statement to present as well with regards to this application.
Thank you, Mr. Shook. Madam President, members of council, Mayor Begany. We do the liquor permit reviews. This application, as Mr. Shook stated, is for permit transfer from a business in Hillsborough, Ohio, to the city of Reynoldsburg for Los Pinos Mexican Grill, 1780 Bryce Road. The establishment is owned by German Herrera. The transfer is being requested because there are no beer or liquor permits currently available because the area has met the quota set by the state of Ohio. RPD does have legitimate concerns about adding a permit above the quota to an area that is already high in OVI arrests and OVI-related traffic crashes. We believe the quota is set in the state statute to limit the total number of permits in a geographic area to maintain roadway safety. And this transfer is a way to get around the law. Having said that, there isn't anything in the investigation that would require us to have a hearing. The chief just wanted to pass along our concerns so that you'd be fully informed when you vote on that issue.
What is the address?
1780 Bryce Road. It's just south of Century City, behind the beverage drive-through.
Council President, it's a strip mall. Council members would probably most recognize it as a strip mall that contains the French bakery.
Right, correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments from council?
I've got a question, please. Thank you for your information, and I agree it's a concern to add another liquor permit to that area. The information we have states that the buyer is required to demonstrate that the project is an economic development project. So I guess this probably is a combination to our development director and maybe even Attorney Shook. This restaurant's already opened and operating. This is not a new business that needs this permit in order to operate. The investment's already there, the investment's already done. Correct? I see our development director shaking his head. So this business is already opened. How long do we know? I'm not sure how long it's been open, but it's not a brand new, opened last week. So this is, as our deputy chief shares, a bit of a way around what the Ohio Revised Code shares. And I think there's reason for concern in that area that a lot of work continues to be made for a lot of safety reasons. So I think I'm not sure that it really meets the need for the hardship of this transfer from another community to our community. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
So the restaurant was already a Mexican restaurant before. Are they the same owners and they're just changing the name?
It's my understanding that this restaurant is newly opened. There used to be a Mexican restaurant beside the French bakery directly. This is not that same space. The woman who owned the Mexican restaurant previously had made numerous complaints to me that her business was struggling because she was unable to serve alcoholic beverages there. This is actually to the right of where that restaurant used to be. And my understanding, I wasn't even aware it had opened yet because it's very, very new.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
The only other thing that I would note, Council President, is that The area where the restaurant is located is in our innovation zone in our zoning code. And technically, a restaurant isn't a permitted or a conditional use in that zone. However, because there was a restaurant operating at that particular location at the time the zoning code was passed, and a new restaurant is going in within a relatively short amount of time, it's actually a grandfathered in use at that location. So whatever effect that might give to council's decision, I figured that was important to note.
Do we have any other comments or questions from council? May I have a motion to approve this Trex permit? Councilmember Bryant, is there a second?
Just to make this, sorry. Attorney Shook, just to make this clear that this restaurant was grandfathered in prior to us making the changes to the zoning code. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, there was a Mexican restaurant operating there before the zoning code was passed back in 2020. That restaurant continued to operate, then closed down. Then the new restaurant opened up. Under our zoning code, that's going to be considered a non-conforming use, but a legal non-conforming use. But I also thought it was important to note that with the zoning code that was passed, that's not a use that was desired in that particular area. It's only there because it's a grandfathered use.
Gotcha.
Attorney Shook, my understanding is that's a completely different location than the previous Mexican restaurant. There's to the right, if you're looking at the bakery, there's two storefronts to the right. The Mexican restaurant that was there prior to the zoning code is no longer there, and then the new one is directly next door to it. It's not actually the same unit.
I'm not entirely sure. We're talking about a non-conforming use in the same building. It doesn't matter if it's in the same space or if it's in the
Okay.
same building.
Okay, so as long as it's in the same structure, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments before I ask for a second?
I have one question, Chief. So in your investigation, you did not find any issues with that one, right?
He has a few liquor licenses. I'm not sure how many. They're so new that there are no violations on file. And there was nothing recent in his background or anything like that that would say that we need to oppose everything. It was merely just the quota and the particular area that we have a lot of problems with OVI and traffic crashes related to OVI. Anything else? Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Pacquiao, is there any other discussion? All in favor?
We may want to do a roll call on this one.
I'm sorry, I don't.
We may want to do a roll call on this one.
Councilmember Bryant has a question.
Attorney Shook, from my understanding, I don't do liquor law by any stretch, but is it true that when there isn't a problem with the application in terms of the person having record or other issues with another license, is it kind of, my understanding is it just kind of passes through whether you object or not, or?
Not with this particular application,
Okay.
because they still have to meet that additional standard of being an economic development project.
Okay.
And I know that as I say that, that sounds kind of vague, but as a general rule, what you're looking at is revenue that could be generated for the city, jobs that could be created in the city, those kinds of things that would help guide you in determining whether it's an economic development project. In addition, the state still has another process after the city process. So if the city agrees that it's an economic development project, the state still has a review process after that, and they make another independent determination of that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Bryant?
Aye.
Councilmember Strickland?
Aye.
Councilmember Salvati,
No.
Councilmember Pecoro,
Aye.
Councilmember Lawson Rowe,
Nay.
Councilmember Cotner,
Nay.
Councilmember Baker.
No.
That's 3 yeas and 4 noes.
So the vote is 3-4.
Correct.
Approved.
No, not approved.
Were there 4 approved and 3 noes?
There were 3 yeas and 4 noes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had it backwards. So it has not been approved. Next, we'll move on to a motion to approve a resolution authorizing the mayor to apply for a grant from the Ohio Public Works Commission, OPWC, for the Wagner Road Phase 1, East Main Street to Priestley Drive Improvement Project. Director Dorman, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Madam President. This is a motion to approve us to go out to OPWC funds, which we've done in the past. I know every year we typically come with an application like this. There is a minor modification I think we want to make to this, and that would be to the meets, basically, as opposed to Broad Street to Priestley. We were actually going to be doing Priestley to Maine. We've been looking at this project. The city's applied for this in the past multiple times, varying levels of completion and design. This design would include a leisure path on one side, a sidewalk on the other, crossings, safe pedestrian crossings at signalized intersections when we can do that. As you know, obviously with the MI development that's now occurring at the corner, the Spring Hill development, and future development along the roadway too, we're trying to find the best way to provide some pedestrian facilities and improve the safety of the road. That's the biggest issue we're dealing with right now, is the safety. We had a fairly significant accident last year along Wagner Road with a motorcycle and a car. The curvature of the road has been an issue too in some areas, so we will look at modifying some of that and getting rid of some of the grades in the road, and also putting curb in, which would help tremendously with drainage. We would also do some street lighting and some minor landscape improvements too.
Are there any questions from council? May I have a motion to approve?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you, Director Dorman. First of all, so again, to clarify, our legislation says Broad to Priestley. This is Priestley to Maine.
Correct.
Okay. So we're Priestley to Maine. And we're, 0 for 2 right now on this one? 0 for 3?
I wasn't here prior to, but I think.
0 for 3, we think?
Yeah. The good thing about this.
We were
is
close.
The
We
county,
kept getting closer every time.
Yeah, the county engineer has agreed to support this and provide some monetary funds as well if we get this awarded. I know that the township is very for this as well, and the school district.
And they all were last time too. I mean, I think
Yeah.
we're in the same, except we've now have maybe a little better financial effort on our part. But I think, again, very optimistic. I mean, again, we kept making progress, I think, each time, and
We were very close last time.
Almost to the point of last time it was like, oh, we got it. So we'll keep fingers crossed this time then. Double checking the last time, I mean, look at the numbers, 9.6 million. Is that about where we were in the last of this? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know if Director Bowser remembers where those numbers were.
This estimate, the engineer estimate's 9.6 million. Is that about what we were before? Do you remember that?
Overall, about 16 million.
Okay. And so same numbers on it. This is a 25% grant. The 75%, which is 7.5 million, 7.2 million, is still then the city pays that part of it.
Correct.
So we're still looking at a pretty big chunk. So I guess Otter Sisak, if we get that loan, we're good on our bond rating, and you're comfortable with these numbers too?
Councilman Cotner, one of the things that the mayor and the attorney and I and the development director talked about in the past is financing Wagner Road with the TIF money from Spring Hill. So maybe it would make me feel better if we added language to that effect if we get the grant. But I think this is just a motion to apply for the grant.
It is.
So,
Yeah, again, just trying to talk things through a little bit and get more information out and available and.
but nothing makes me feel better than knowing that there's going to be money to pay that specific bill.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I believe with the motion, I did attach the engineer's estimate, probable estimate, currently showing some.
You did.
Cost, yeah. So hopefully that helps out a little bit.
Madam
Lots-
President, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Just lots of fine print. And again, something to just try to share and get out talk. Okay. Sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
No problem. Madam President, members of council, just to kind of add a couple of details that are a little bit different than the last time. This time, we're actually working very well with EMH&T on their recommendations for approval. We did miss the first go-around by 1 point, and then the next time around, it was actually by an additional couple of points. By breaking this up into multiple phases, and the way we are is one of the benefits to it. We also have additional contributors to this particular project. MI obviously is one of them. Director Dorman was nice enough to not spoil the amount of money that Franklin County has committed to the project, and he left that for me. That is actually $1.7 million that they will be contributing in financial contributions for this specific project, in addition to approximately just a shade under $300,000 from MI, as well as a commitment from Turlow Township that I'm going to be formally requesting later on this week. So when you have multiple entities contributing financially to a process like that, this will add a number of things that we did not have last time, so giving that point value in there. In addition, the TIF that we passed last year for the MI development actually creates this in phases. So for every phase that comes out, the money that is generated from that will actually be contributed to this. And we actually had it designed, if you recall last time, the Wagner Road project would not actually begin until we hit a certain benchmark through first phase, second phase, third phase, and so on. With the MI development moving further than expected because of the housing boom, they're actually already, as we all know, well into phase 2, which actually covers a majority of the cost for the second phase. The first phase is actually lower than the $9.9 million that was commented on before. The first phase is actually $6.6 million, in addition to the 9.9 on the back end. Ultimately, I'm sure that the cost will go a little bit higher than that with some of the improvements in materials costs and things like that. But the first step with this is to get the surveying done so we can figure out exactly how much right-of-way, what the best pathway would be all the way across. But there are a number of factors in this that make this a much more attractive application, specifically because of the commitment from the Franklin County engineers monetarily and basically passionately. It was nice. Usually we're calling them for things. This was one of those few times where they kept calling us saying, when are we getting this on the legislation? When are we getting this on? So like I said, I think this is a much better go-around on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? May I have a motion to approve the OPWC grant application? Councilmember Bryant, is there a second?
Second.
Councilwoman Strickland, are there any other discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries. Item C is a motion to approve a resolution to adopt an expanded Reynoldsburg City policy supporting minority and women-owned businesses, and to direct action by the city administration to investigate, recommend, research, and draft a proposed equal opportunity ordinance for the city of Reynoldsburg. Councilmember Strickland?
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, everyone. Last year, I started investigating on how we can bring small mom and pops businesses here to Reynoldsburg for women and minority business owners. And two, I was wondering how well are we doing as a city to attract these business owners? Women and minority-owned businesses are underrepresented in our economy. That's why I'm doing everything I can to increase access to capital for women and minority-owned businesses owners. Entrepreneurs play a vital role in economic growth and community development, not only because they are productive members of the economy, but because they help extend the same opportunity to others by creating jobs. When minority entrepreneurs thrive, it trickles down and has a positive impact on the country, state, and the city as a whole. I would like to read this motion here. Give me 1 second. Resolution to adopt an expanded Reynoldsburg City policy supporting minority and women-owned businesses, and to direct actions by city administration to investigate, recommend, research, and draft proposal equal opportunity ordinance for the city of Reynoldsburg. Whereas the city of Reynoldsburg regularly enters into contracts for the procurement of goods, commodities, and service of many kinds. Through its procurement activities, the city has a substantial impact upon the economy of the Reynoldsburg and Central Ohio area. And whereas historically, minorities and women are substantially and significantly less likely to own their own businesses as the result of discrimination than would be expected based upon their observed characteristics, including age, education, geographic location, and industry. And whereas the city of Reynoldsburg has a compelling governmental interest in remedying the racial and gender discrimination that exists in the market segment in which the city does business, and ensuring that the city is not a participant in such discrimination, thereby allowing all segments of the Reynoldsburg community to share in the economic benefits of the city. And whereas council believes the city of Reynoldsburg should investigate, recommend, research, and draft legislation establishing race and gender conscious contractual goals, and if utilized, requires that goals be based on constitutional standards related to the city's marketplace. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the city of Reynoldsburg, Ohio, Section 1, that council hereby adopts a city policy directing city administration to promote the inclusion of minority and women-owned businesses in the contract it enters into for the procurement of goods, commodities, and service. Section 2, that the mayor and the city attorney are hereby directed to investigate, research, recommend, and draft for council's considerations, strategies, procedures, and appropriate limitation and exemption for substantial implementation of this policy to be codified as law in the city of Reynoldsburg. And Section 3, that the mayor and city attorney are to report and make such recommendation to council within 90 days of the date of this resolution. And Section 4, that this resolution shall take effect and be enforced from and after the earliest period allowed by law. That ends my resolution.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Baker.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to say that I support this motion, first of all. Second of all, because I helped Councilwoman Strickland on this. Third, to the gentleman's question about making one for veterans, I do believe that is in the plan, but that's something separate. From what I understand, I could be wrong. Attorney Shook? Attorney Shook?
Yes, sir.
So he was in the moment there. About the Veterans Grant, I remember receiving an email.
I believe so we are currently, and this is separate from this particular resolution.
Exactly.
We are currently working, and the Development Department has been working on a grant process by which we can provide support and aid to not only women and minority-owned businesses in the city of Reynoldsburg, but also businesses owned by veterans. So that is something that the city is diligently working on.
Okay. I just want to make that clarification. 2, well, this would be 3. This come about because it is true that women and minority have a hard time finding support for businesses. Also, it's been historically done in the past that minority and women tend to get higher rates when it comes to try to get loans for businesses. And I thought, as from the city of respect, that we should stand up and help those businesses, those who want to come in and do businesses here in Reynoldsburg, to try to help them get some sort of seed money to create that business. It's always been said that small businesses, period, are the backbone of the economy, which is true. Yes, you have big corporations that hire people, but majority of the small businesses employ people too, and this will help them get a leg up, seed money to give them a leg up, especially minority and women, to open up the business that they dream of. I couldn't fathom somebody's dream of opening up a business only to be told no because the way they look or because of their gender, which has happened in the past before. I'm not just making that up. It's been a documented fact that that's happened. But here in Reynoldsburg, I'm glad that we are standing up and saying, come here, we want to help you. And so I just want to make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? Yes.
I do, thank you. I guess to clarify something, first of all, Attorney Shook, you talked about something being worked on that involves grant monies. This does not involve any allocation of funds. This legislation this resolution is more about trying to direct the city to work with minorities and women and minorities. Is that correct? I mean, make sure I'm understanding things, because even as Councilman Baker was talking, they were blending together quite a bit.
Sure. So just to separate them a bit, and if the development director wants to expound upon my explanation, I would ask him to do so. But we are looking at two separate things here. One, a grant program to provide assistance to those businesses. And similar to what we did last year with the small business grant program from the CARES Act funding, it's my understanding that that funding would come from the stimulus money that is to come to the city from the federal government. So that's that grant program.
Okay.
This is to focus on the utilization of minority and women-owned businesses as vendors for the city. So as companies that we work with for our particular needs. There are cities in Ohio and around the country that have similar legislation. Most of them are bigger cities that have bigger budgets, so it's a little bit of a new territory for a city our size. We are looking into making sure that whatever legislation we craft and present to council is something that fits well for our city.
Okay. And so this resolution is really putting, frankly, the onus on you all to craft something that will empower women and minorities to work directly for the city as contractors, as you're saying.
Correct.
This really isn't a grant program. This isn't funding. This just opens a door a little bit wider so that they can have the opportunity.
It's a bit more permanent than a grant program. The grant program will be based on, the
Money from the
allocation that we get
CARES.
from the federal government, which doesn't happen every year.
Yeah.
But this is something where we contract with different vendors every single year from various departments.
Okay. And then I think the challenge will be how that can be written. And again, since you have 90 days to work on this, can continue to educate me, but how that can be written that the door, when we get bids, therefore lowest and best, we're not taking into account lowest and best with taxpayer dollars of gender and race. So I'm just, how are you seeing that? I mean, again, you shared that there's some other things, so you've already been thinking on this. How does that fit with what law requires, with what our charter says? What preliminary thoughts do you have as you're stepping into this?
Fortunately, our charter provides to the city of Reynoldsburg probably the most flexibility when it comes to awarding contracts to lowest bidders, because we use the language lowest and best. And it's that language and best that gives us a lot of flexibility as a city to choose a bidder who is perhaps not the lowest, but someone who has characteristics that demonstrate that they are quote unquote the best. But there is a challenge there, and I think that over the next 90 days, we will work hard to meet that challenge. That's why I asked for, instead of just drafting legislation and presenting it to council today, I asked Councilmember Strickland and Councilmember Baker for that 90-day period to make sure that we have enough time to do the necessary research and structure that language in the right way to present it to council at the appropriate time.
Okay. And then my last two parts of the questions. One, I think that Mr. Luzader makes a good point about the veterans being included into something like this. But also when we're talking women and minorities, we're still in the midst of Pride Month of the LGBTQ community. Is there a consideration into that community in this legislation as well?
I think there certainly could be. I mean, that's up to council. I think with minority and women-owned businesses, one of the things that makes it a little bit easier for the city to get that off the ground is that the state already has a certification process and standards by which they certify businesses as minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses. In fact, in the city of Reynoldsburg, we have 9 such certified women-owned businesses in the city of Reynoldsburg, and we have 11 state-certified minority-owned businesses in the city of Reynoldsburg.
Okay. Thank you for sharing some, and like to see how this evolves over 90 days. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Yes, Councilmember Strickland.
So thank you, Attorney Shook, for that explanation. So to be clear, the reason why I end up bringing this too is also, number one, to keep us accountable, right, as a city, to make sure that we are doing our due diligence about minority women, and that falls in within that category. And so, you know, as it has already been mentioned regarding the veterans, something could come down later, you know, during the pipe. But I really want this to be focused on what I presented, right? And then secondly, I want to make sure that we are, as new businesses come into Reynoldsburg, we are assisting those individuals, right? So that will come from the grant money that will be associated when we get that allocated. And then there will be a particular process to go through, similar than we did before. Is that correct? Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Strickland, for offering the resolution, and thank you for the robust conversation that we're having. I'd like to just celebrate the city for exploring these opportunities and actually opening up. So say, for instance, if the city has bids for, let's just say, Project X, and oftentimes we as women and we as minorities, when there's opportunities available, the first thing we always hear is, well, there's no one from that community there's no one from that community, that is interested or that's available or that has access. And so I think having these conversations later on, work sessions for the legislation, celebrates that there are opportunities to come and be a part of the conversation. And being considered doesn't necessarily mean that the women-owned company or the minority-owned company would get the job, but at least that they're at the table. And so I'm celebrating that. And then we'll make baby steps. And perhaps there will be a women-owned business or minority-owned business that can offer whatever services that the city needs at that opportune time.
Yes, Councilmember Strickland.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson-Rowe. When we talk about baby steps, right, let's just be clear. We have continued to do these baby steps. And so it's time for us to make sure that we are doing leaps and bounds to make sure women and minorities are at the table. You know, for so long, we just haven't been there. And so I want to, you know, make sure that the reasons why we're doing this to give everyone the opportunity to be at that table. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any?
And I got to follow up with that. I agree with Councilwoman Strickland, because how many times here in the city of Reynoldsburg have minority or woman-owned business been at the table? I can't think of any, unless somebody here can pop up and tell me they know. I don't know. And even if you could count on one hand, that's a shame in this 100-and-something-year-old city. So I agree everything she said. The time for baby steps is over. It's time to push this car and drive and let's go forward. And so I just want everybody to think about that as we go along in this process. And I am interested in seeing what Attorney Shook comes up with in 90 days. And so that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? May I have a motion to recognize the approval of this resolution? Councilmember Bryant, may I have a second? Councilmember Pacquiao, is there any other further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries. Next on our agenda will be our reports. Clerk of Court report. Clerk Prasher, please.
The clerk of court submitted monies collected from the court dates of May 6th, May 13th, May 20th, and May 27th in the amount of $16,673. Item B, the auditor's report. The auditor's department submitted a report for the month of April.
Next, we'll have our West Licking Fire District report. Councilmember Baker.
Thank you, Madam President. As you look in the agenda, the stats for May, and once again, the West Licking Joint Fire Department is doing an excellent job servicing our areas along as the entire west portion of Licking County, because we all know that West Licking County is really growing in population and development. And so they're doing a bang-up job getting to people when they call in for emergencies. And I just want to thank them. And I just see in the minutes, it reflects in it reflects in your agenda packet with the stats. Sorry.
Thank you. Next, we'll have our Development, Parks, and Recreation Committee. Councilmember Baker.
Thank you, Madam President. This is the Development, Park, and Recreation Committee meeting for June 28th, 2021. Members in attendance are Councilmember Cotner, Councilmember Lawson Rowe, Councilmember Pacquiao, myself, and you, Madam President. There are two items on our agenda. The first one is the ordinance to amend Chapter 7, Planning and Zoning Code for the City of Reynoldsburg. Director Belcher, you're already there.
Thank you, Chairman Baker, Madam President, other members of City Council. I feel like we were just back in the fall talking about this, but as we talked about it then, and we'll talk about it today, this needs to be a living document. We need to make minor changes. We need to consistently continue to recalibrate what we have out there to make it work better for the city. So I am going to go over a quick timeline of where we're at, and then we'll get into sort of some of the meat and potatoes. So tonight's council meeting would be the first reading. The second one would be the first meeting in July. There's going to be a work session this Thursday at Planning Commission, but Planning Commission won't take a vote on it until the 21st. It's a special meeting that's already been called and sent out. All letters of requirements for public notice have already been out and pushed into the mail well ahead of the 30-day deadline, and then you'll see it with your final council meeting at the end of July, the second council meeting before your August recess. Let's talk a quick bit. I believe we talked a little bit about the development handbook. I wanted to let you know that we are working on that. It's a little bit confusing because it really shouldn't be called a development handbook, but yet a developer's handbook. It actually involves a lot of service and a lot of engineering that's involved into it. So we're working with the EMH&T. It's about a 3-year-old document, but it does not have all of the updated information from the zoning code of what little is in the planning and zoning aspect of it. So we are changing it to make sure that is, but that's a separate document than what we're talking about tonight. So we formulated a committee that was the city attorney, the mayor, myself, staff, BZBA, Planning Commission, and Councilmember Savati. The goal of that was to bring everyone together and start discussing open topics. The things that you have in front of you that we've discussed that we would like to have move forward. Obviously, this also has to go to Planning Commission to get a vote on. First is medical marijuana. The definition of what we are seeing it as. Currently, it's pretty ambiguous, and we always side with the applicant when it gets to that point. The goal of that is to not allow it to just be into a general pharmacy, but to understand it, to make sure that we're defining it in the zoning code, as it is a real thing that is out there. The state has defined itself. We need to make sure that we're doing the same here as the city and making sure that we're taking a look at it. I know City Attorney Shook has an ordinance after this one that he'll discuss and further, so I'll bypass any more information. Next, we took a look at a credit for a green space. We had been giving credits for open detention pond spaces. The goal of that is being that we are okay with said credit for additional space or allocation on a property as long as said detention basin was going to include a few items. Either it was going to include a fence, natural landscaping, or something that becomes an amenity to the development and not just a hole in the ground that is filled with water. So the idea being is the Planning Commission will make that recommendation when that major site plan comes in on whether or not to award the 10% credit. Next, you don't have it before you because it is still working through and we're getting feedback from planning commissioners, is additional design requirements for our residential districts, talking about doors, windows, different specific aspects that we're going to take a look at. We have a very thorough one in our old Reynoldsburg neighborhood and commercial districts. This one is to give a little bit more teeth in our residential areas. We've not had issues of that coming up, but Planning Commission has done a really nice job of asking for specific things from various developers, and we want to make sure that we set that across the board. Additionally, we talked about commercial signage, window coverage. These were things brought up by our planning and zoning administrator, Ms. Wheeler. So there are some minor changes and tweaks within that. We are eliminating the zoning permit for roof-mounted solar, and the reason for that is we already have a building permit because they have to go get an inspection for a roof. So basically we were double dipping and we're not trying to make people charge them twice for the same exact permit. So we got rid of that. We're keeping the zoning permit if somebody would like to put solar panels still into the ground. We also added a building height transition requirement, and that is mainly to protect single-story, single-family homes from other higher density type of uses like apartment complexes or townhomes, especially anything over that's 2 stories. So what we did was we allowed within 40 feet of said height transition, it's a credit of 150%. So it's to balance that out a little better than what you may see in some other areas of the city. So that is a new add. We already had that in our inside districts. We actually got rid of them in the inside districts. It didn't make sense for a commercial area, but we took that same concept and we added it to the residential areas. Additionally, we talked about this very early on of creating an overlay district for the Huber homes. We took a look at that and we didn't exactly know how we would like to view it. So we broke it down into a couple of phases. One, we're creating this overlay district. It's still going to be a suburban residential over Huber homes, but it'll be an outline zone that will be on the map, and it'll have an additional certificate of appropriateness. So the home on Retton Road that comes up on Facebook quite often and amongst in these chambers, we do not want that issue to come up again. So the goal is to protect the homes and the character that's there in the Huber homes to ensure that any home that does get built into that area basically coincides with that existing feel and character of that neighborhood. So they'll have to get a certificate of appropriateness. They'll have to come to Planning Commission, even if it is already an allowed use, single-family home, and we'll definitely be taking a look at the height restrictions as well. The old code and the old building section allowed for 2.5 stories. That is currently why that house sits the way that it does. And obviously, the problem has been exacerbated because they have not completed the building. So it is a problem that's just compounding, and so we want to make sure that we're going to do something about it now. Additionally, there are already some changes that we made policy-wise that the mayor has implemented with staff, and that is major site plan applications. So we're including a 21-day application before. Typically, it was 14 days. However, we're giving an extra week for staff because that includes the city engineer staff report. And that's a very important document because we want to take a look at stormwater detention or retention. We want to take a look at different types of calculations. If we want to do a traffic analysis, we want to make sure that our city engineer is doing those and not somebody else's engineer that's going to give us either misled information. We want to make sure that it's correct, and so we're giving ourselves an extra week for a major site plan for that. So that is now written into the code as well. We did not have small format grocery listed as a definition, so we've added that. There wasn't an office use for Old Reynoldsburg Neighborhood District, and typically where you're going to find that is off of Lancaster. There's a couple of different office plazas that are over there that are across from the Redwood product. Those would basically be a legal non-conforming use as it stands right now, and so we wanted to make sure that those were legal conforming and a permitted use within that district. We took a look at the development handbook. We actually brought in the city engineer and we took a look at residential driveway widths, the type of materials that we were going to be utilizing. What does it look like if somebody dedicates back a road to the city? So we definitely got into the weeds on those. And obviously that's going to lead to more changes in the development handbook to make sure that it coincides with a lot. We also removed the glass requirement for inside. It was a 60% requirement. The problem with that is it probably makes sense on the front side of a building, but when you just blatantly say 60%, that means that all sides have to be 60%, and typically the back side of a building is normally where mechanicals are, and so it's not practical or feasible. So we just got rid of that as well. There was a commercial lot width. There was just a typo and an error that was on that. And then we also added back from the old code, it just did not get ported over, portable storage units, so pods. Somebody who has those, technically you're not allowed to have those in the city as it currently stands, but we are giving special time for people, especially as they move and things like that. So making sure that that's allowed. So let's talk real quick the map, because that's really the next biggest thing, and it's probably the thing maybe there'll be some questions over. So we are making 3 map amendments. The last time you guys saw it, there was no map amendments at all. And I think this got attached to everyone's packet this evening. So the 3 major changes was, one was up on the north of Lancaster, almost towards the end of our city boundaries, right at the edge, up near Broad Street. There is currently a veterinarian hospital that is there. It was zoned originally in our zoning code as community commercial. We feel that it is a better alignment with the Insight District, especially in that area. That is an allowable use for a veterinarian hospital. I think it was an oversight when we originally did it. There's no other community commercial that's in the area. It's surrounded by residential. There is closer Insight District where Dynalab is, and based on those uses and based on so many conditional uses that we have, it gives the city a bit more teeth on what could potentially go there after the fact. So this is just us preparing ourselves. If something were to happen, it allows us to be able to dictate a little easier, and it aligns better with how we see uses being there. Additionally, we came and found that there was a parcel that was split a long time ago over on Oak Valley. This actually came up on our BZBA meeting, where it was both Insight, Main Street District, and suburban residential. The gentleman wants to build a few homes that is out there. He'll probably still need to go for some variances, but we wanted to make sure that we cleaned up that lines because it's not 2 separate parcels anymore, it's just 1 parcel. So we are rezoning all of that suburban residential within this. And then finally, there is a lady that would like to rezone a parcel. This is also part of a BZBA. It happens to be on Main Street. It's 8300 East Main Street. It used to be a very old home that was built and established in the 1800s. It was on septic and well that was out there. It caught fire a couple of years ago. It's part of the Licking County Land Bank. She would like to build an A-frame home that is out there. She did not get approval. She removed her application from BZBA. It's a $1,400 fee, and that's a very large fee for somebody that's taking a look at 1 parcel. So what we've decided to do is we've included that into this packet, allowing City Council and allowing Planning Commission to make up that choice, because there's no reason to go back through this exact steps all over again and charge somebody for 1 parcel. So if we're including in this, we can always take it out, and you can decide to not approve that, but we are putting it in there. And it would be surrounded solely by the Insight District as well. So those are the 3 map changes, nothing huge. It's a total of almost 4 to 5 acres total that we're doing as map changes, and really a lot of it is just cleanup. With that, I yield my time. And
I would say take a breath. We knew that there were going to be changes down the road after we approved the zoning code, because it's a living document, and we have to go in and clean up what's not working and improve what is. But anyway, is there any question from council or committee first? Councilman Cotner.
Thank you. Just, I guess the first question is, I mean, doesn't seem like a lot of major issues, but it seems like there's a time crunch on this. You said there's been a special meeting called, Planning Commission's meeting, I forget what the dates you said, but is there a clock ticking on this of some sort that you're trying to move this quicker, that there was a special meeting for them called? I thought I heard you say that there was one called and they were all going to be there, and then we're going to try to hurry and get this done before the August break. So is there any time constraints that we're concerned with this?
So the council meetings will go through the normal 3 readings. The problem was we want to make sure that we're giving ample amount of time. So city law states, based on our charter, that we only have to give 7 days notice. However, the city attorney and myself had numerous conversations, and there was recent case law in the Supreme Court that basically dictates that really you should be giving 30-day notice. Now, we are, a home rule state, which should be able to set that ourselves. However, that was overruled by that Supreme Court case, so we're ensuring that we're doubling down and giving ourselves 30-day notice when we put out those notices. So when we did that, we missed this Thursday's deadline for the Planning Commission meeting. So what we've decided to do was set it up as a work session, an extra day that you typically wouldn't get for people to come out and speak on it, and then we called a special meeting on the 22nd for when it would be voted on, but it still follows the same timeline through City Council. And it's sort of set like that. So there's no rush, there's no emergency language on this. It's going through the process. We just had to have that special meeting.
That makes sense. It just seemed, again, calling it a special session, that was the only part that I wanted to clarify on that. Which then I guess brings up another point. Do we need to clean that up? If we're supposed to give 30 days, do we just want to get that cleaned up somewhere along the way?
Well, that's a little difficult because, case law is changing consistently in the state of Ohio. And the General Assembly passes new laws every year, some of which are targeted at the home rule powers of its municipalities. And so consequently, we don't necessarily know with a lot of confidence where home rule begins and home rule ends. With some recent case law from the Ohio Supreme Court suggesting that even some of our procedural rules will be subject to state law where it affects property rights. We wanted to, out of an abundance of caution, follow the Ohio Revised Code timeframe as compared to our charter timeframe, just to be safe.
But then you're comfortable, generally speaking, to keep it as the 7 days, except when if we're able to do 30, good, better.
No. Like we did this in the fall, and even last year when we passed this whole new zoning code, I made sure we did 30 days, just in case. And we will continue to do 30 days on zoning code changes here going forward.
Okay. Like I said, I just wanted to clarify the time thing when we heard special meeting. The other question then, the vet clinic, is it just that one parcel that's going to now be an innovation district? Inside district, excuse me.
It's a 2-acre parcel that's just up to the edge. It's surrounded by residential. The comp plan actually called out for residential medium, which would be apartments or townhomes that are in there. Given its current use, we wanted to make sure that it aligned better within the existing code, and we just didn't feel that community commercial and what could be potentially there wouldn't really necessarily align with the surrounding uses. But innovation would align more with the current use and any future use potentially on that space.
Right. And that's, again, just if the vet clinic says, we're done, we're retiring, we're selling, whatever, then at that point, it becomes, then they'd be a non-conforming use. Then it would be, or somebody else would have to fit to the inside district.
Correct.
Okay. And then the 8,300, I watched that meeting. I thought that was voted down. It wasn't voted down. She pulled that?
Yeah, she withdrew her application from that. And it was because what she was asking for was a use variance. And based on the zoning code, you as city council have regulated that that's what you want a certain thing to be. And so that's kind of overstepping the bounds of that, and we didn't feel that that was necessarily proper. City attorney took a ruling on that. We really didn't like the Oak Valley one, the way that it comes. It's really circumventing the entire process. It really needs to go through a zoning code change. And since we were already in the process of doing that well before she even submitted the application, we just felt that it was easier to take both of those applications and put them on. And if those were things that we did want to see changed, then we would at least let it go through that process and not charge somebody additional money to go do that.
Yeah, both of them, I mean, makes sense. And it makes sense, obviously, for that to be residential back there, so that sounds fine. Okay, my last question then, talking about height of buildings. Seems like this one's a little bit too late on an example like the apartments next to the church that are gonna be significantly higher than residential that comes right back behind it. Will this help prevent some of those things in the future if there's an apartment?
Yes, that's a great question. So if it was the existing application and it was 3 stories that was next to the 1 stories, then yes, of course, this would help combat some of that. When they changed their application to the 2 stories and they pushed their setback off of the single-family properties, they would then conform to that, and it gave a little more breadth to them to be able to do so. But it is to prevent future instances like that of them getting approved, especially standard single-family. Now, we have no other residential medium zones in the entire city that can be developed on. The ones that we're really taking a look at is really the stuff that's potentially even further out east than the Eastwood Development Project and other areas like that, and ensuring that we're not going to, see something if, for whatever reason, somebody came in and bulldozed some land and they built next to, say, Huber, and they wanted to do 3 stories and they wanted to push it all the way up. The goal of that would be that they need to make sure that they're stepping it and they're showing proper, height delineation between the buildings and sort of bringing it further off from the setback. That's more than just the regular code.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from committee?
I just have a,
Councilman Pacquiao, he's on the committee.
Okay. One question. You mentioned that you are increasing from 14 to 21 days. Is it some permit or what is it? Can you just
Yeah,
tell a little bit more on
just
that
for
one?
the major site plans. The rest of the applications will still do the 14 days, and any subsequent after that major site plan will get its 14 days if they need to resubmit for whatever reason. But the 21 days is not necessarily directly for the staff here at City Hall, but it's our contractors, our city engineer. For them, it's to give them an extra week of time for them to be able to review, and it allows us to give the information out to Planning Commission out much earlier than 7 days. So then if they have any questions, comments, or concerns, things that are egregious, they can get back to us a lot earlier. And we're making the process a lot more user-friendly because we're allowed to put a lot more set of eyes on a certain document than just quickly trying to go through something. So though our processes can be business-friendly, we want to make sure that we're also being good stewards and we're checking applications very thoroughly.
Any other questions from the committee? Any from council? Councilman Savati?
I just have a super brief comment, just as far as those 2-second map changes, since we're in the Facebook Live time because of COVID, the last BZBA meeting, if you didn't get a chance to watch it, those 2 items were discussed in very minute detail, and it'd just be a great primer for when we get to the point where we actually may have to vote on that. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that meeting, it was a good one. So,
And I will say the few residents that did come out for the Oak Valley one were very much in favor of it being only residential. So it was a win for the residents surrounding as well.
Any other comments, questions from council? Okay, seeing none, I will go ahead and make the motion that we forward this on to council for its first reading. Do I have a second? Second by Councilman Pacquiao. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. This will be forwarded to council for its first reading. The second item on our agenda, I'm sorry, is an ordinance establishing Chapter 785 medical marijuana facilities of the codified ordinance for the city of Reynoldsburg. Attorney Shook.
Thank you, Chair Baker, I appreciate it. This goes sort of hand in hand with the zoning changes that were just presented. Obviously, a couple years ago, the General Assembly in the state of Ohio legalized with certainly significant conditions the use, production, and dispensing of medical marijuana in the state of Ohio. And so consequently, it's anticipated that the city will be presented with potential commercial activity that will be designated as medical marijuana activity, whether as a processor or a dispensary or a cultivator. And our code didn't address that. We have a use defined as pharmacy. And our obligation when we are enforcing our code or interpreting that code is to interpret it in favor of the applicant or the property owner. So if it's vague, the tie goes to the property owner. And a medical marijuana dispensary would have fallen under the broad definition of pharmacy presented by our zoning code. So we wanted to make sure that we were taking some control over the situation. Similar to what other communities have done in Ohio since that state law was passed. So we are proposing and presenting Chapter 785, which would license and regulate medical marijuana facilities in the city of Reynoldsburg. In addition, with some of the zoning code changes, we have identified certain commercial districts where medical marijuana facilities might be allowed. They are all listed as conditional uses, which means that they would need BZBA approval, even in those districts where we have decided they might be allowed. And we put on conditions within the zoning code under section 1105.13, factors that would need to be applied by the BZBA in determining whether to approve those. Those factors include location limitations. So for example, a facility could not be located within 500 feet of another medical marijuana facility. It could not be located within 500 feet of a public park, residential district, school, or park. In addition, and this is a significant provision, which is that the exterior of any medical marijuana facility would need to be properly screened so that its activities, with the exception of administrative tasks occurring within the facility, could not be observed by the public from the right-of-way. We wanted to make sure that they couldn't tell exactly what was going on in there. That's also for security and public safety reasons. So we presented what I think is a pretty comprehensive approach, both in our zoning code and in our business regulations, to how it is that we would approach the potential incoming of these kinds of businesses into the city.
Okay. Sound like we're just trying to get ahead of it before it happens, which
Correct.
is a good thing. Rather be prepared than unprepared. Is there any comments or questions from the committee? Councilman Connor?
I'm glad to see a lot of the work put in it and restrictions to make sure, but I think it's a great plan. Just one, I guess, concern, and you obviously know the law, but the last item of implied consent to search, that seems a bit governmental. If they are a legally operating business, state of Ohio has said they're allowed to legally operate. Are we overreaching on saying our police can go in at will at any time?
So that is an excellent question, and that was a question that was also raised by one of the members of our working group. And what this is what we call a quote-unquote pervasively regulated business. The United States Supreme Court allows administrative searches of those types of businesses, even without a warrant. And in fact, the state of Ohio, under Chapter 3796, the revised code where they legalized medical marijuana, also has a similar provision by which the Department of Commerce is able to inspect these premises as well. The reason why we put one in for the city of Reynoldsburg, even though there already is one for the state, is that we have found at times that the state can get a little backed up. We found that, for example, with some gambling operations in the city, and so we've had to engage in some municipal self-help efforts without being able to rely necessarily upon the state.
I get that. I mean, I know any regulated business, mine, for example, I have a, annual inspection. I don't know when they're going to come and show up, and I get that, but it just still worries me a bit. I think we're pushing that one a little more when we're saying the police department has a right to show up at their business and search. I think there still has to be a reason that we're going in. I think we're pushing a little bit on that last point of it is my only concern there, I think.
And I totally understand and appreciate that concern, and if council wanted to scale that back, I don't think that would be an unreasonable request.
Even if there was a way to modify maybe as much scale back, but it just seems to me that it's a search at will, the way it's written. And like I said, if they are a legitimately legally operating business dispensing medical, again, whether we like it or not, it's a legitimate business dispensing a medical product. That worries me that the city can go in at will. I just think that's a slippery slope again there, but thank you.
I understand, and I think it probably sounds a little worse when we're talking about the police department.
Sure it does.
Administering this particular chapter. And in researching what other cities have done, they usually put that responsibility on their quote-unquote public safety director. We don't have a public safety director here, mainly because we don't have a fire department, so there's really no need to have an additional administrative staff to do that. So it certainly carries the impression or the it has sort of it looks different when you say police department as opposed to administrative search.
Good. Any other questions from the committee? Any from council? Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, just wanted to clarify, Deputy Chief was able to let me know that this provision is also allowable for liquor permit searches as well. So it's not anything that isn't already happening at establishments that sell alcohol.
Correct. It's that's also what we call a pervasively regulated business, much like the business.
Okay, any from council? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to make a motion that we forward this on to council for a first reading. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilwoman Lawson Rowe. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries, and it will be forwarded to council for its first reading. As there's no other business in front of the Development, Park, and Recreation Committee, Madam President, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to Public Safety, Law, and Courts Committee. Councilmember Bryant.
Thank you, President Jenkins. This is a Public Safety Law and Courts Committee meeting for June 28th, 2021. Members in attendance are Councilmember Cotner, Councilmember Lawson Rowe, Councilmember Pacquiao, myself, and President Jenkins. Item 1 is an ordinance to amend Section 505.17, nuisance conditions prohibited limiting the number of domesticated animals kept in a residential district. This legislation has returned to committee for further discussion. Attorney Shook, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, Chair Bryant. This is, so I have presented a draft of Section 505.17 subsections D and E, relatively consistent with some of the discussions that we had at the last city council meeting. I've also had an opportunity to have conversations with members of council generally and members of this committee specifically. And what's presented isn't what is proposed to be a final draft. It is what is presented to be furtherance of the discussion that we had at the last meeting. And so at this time, I would ask the committee to make a decision about whether they want to move this legislation forward or table it either temporarily or table it permanently.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Shook. I've been reflecting on this a lot since our last meeting. I think the intention is to avoid another scenic drive, and I think that's a wonderful intention to have. I was a little concerned that maybe it was legislation to prevent something from happening that has already happened and maybe will not happen again. I was disappointed to hear from one of our community members commenting at the beginning of the meeting that was not an isolated incident, which is unfortunate and disturbing. You know, as a pet owner myself, I don't know that I would want anybody telling me how many I can have. But, that said, we don't want our neighbors, our friends, neighbors, residents of this town to not be able to enjoy their backyard patios. Anything that I do on my property should not extend across the property line, which includes smells and sounds. I don't know that I like a set number, given the wide variety of housing that we have here. A house in Brookside can probably not have as many animals as, say, some of the houses that are out off of Taylor Road. You could probably, I guess I would be inclined to say if we are going to limit, the number of pets that we allow residents to have, I feel like it should maybe be on a square footage basis. Because as I said, if you've got a house off of Taylor Road, you've probably got a couple, thousand, 2,000-3,000 square feet where, some of our smaller houses like in Huber and whatnot, many of them are not even up to 1,200 square feet. So I guess I'm just kind of talking to hear myself talk at this point, but yeah, I've got mixed emotions about doing this because we do have responsible pet owners in this town who are capable of caring for multiple animals, where some are not. And I don't know that we necessarily need to be in the business of regulating animals in people's homes as long as what they're doing in that home isn't affecting their neighbors adversely. So I'm just throwing that out there. If anybody else has it, anybody on the committee, Bowen?
Yeah, after last week, at last council meeting, I went to 6 resident citizen in my ward to talk about this legislation. None of them have any idea what we're discussing about. And 4 of them, they were reluctantly telling, they were not telling either our yes or no kind of thing, but reluctantly telling 5 is the number according to them. I have no number, I didn't say nothing. And other 2 was telling there's none of the business. We can consider ourselves, we know what we need to do. So I didn't say this or that number, but that is their point of view. And I'm still wanting to go back and talk to more people and what they want to say. So that's all.
Any other members of the committee? Councilwoman Lawson Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. I, too, am not an expert in terms of numbers of animals within a home. I have an animal. I have 1 dog. So I did something similar as Councilman Peckerell, and that was to ask neighbors and to receive their feedback. One young woman that I spoke with who is an animal lover, and she is studying to be a veterinarian, her first comment just out of her gut was 5. But then as we further discussed, she shared in terms of the different animals, say for instance, cats, how they are much more independent and seek their own food. And if they're out in the wild, that they travel in packs of 12 or 15, which she was educating me. I have some notes here that I wanted to make sure that I shared. She also talked about, in the case of if you happen to have an animal that has a litter of puppies or kittens, and would they have an opportunity to raise them at a certain point before they would be in violation? And I do know that we discussed that. She also had another point that she shared in terms of counseling. Would there be any sort of counseling I'm not sure if we can mandate it or recommend it. If someone is in violation of that number, whatever that number may be, would we want to refer that family to some sort of counseling if they were animal hoarding or not caring for animals and getting out of control, as we heard earlier from neighbors? She also raised another point that we've discussed of those being grandfathered in. And actually, how would we keep track of neighbor A has 1 dog, neighbor B has 6 dogs? Would this be a self-reporting to the city? And how would we keep up with that? And these were just some points that she brought up for us to consider.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Councilmember Cotner.
Thank you. The woman who spoke earlier about the German Shepherds, she specifically said it was a kennel, that they were selling those dogs was the implication, not just they were the pets. Where's the differentiation? How do we, so if someone has a kennel, they're breeding, raising pets for sale. Is that what our differentiating line is here?
Yeah, so a boarding house or a kennel is going to be a person or a company engaged in some fashion of commercial activity, whether it's housing those animals for a price, babysitting essentially, or breeding animals on the premises and selling them. It can be difficult unless they are out in the open about their commercial activity. I don't want to speak specifically to that situation because we are aware of it.
Okay.
And I think as the speaker already mentioned, we've already taken some enforcement action there and it's still in more of an investigation zone. But it can be difficult unless they are holding themselves out there openly that they are engaging in commercial activity on their property. And then kind of getting back to Councilmember Lawson's point from the resident that she talked to, this law would be very difficult to enforce. I think there's a lot of laws that are difficult to enforce, but the ones where the activity or the criminal activity is taking place inside the home are exceptionally difficult. We don't catch every speeder in the city. We don't catch every thief in the city. We don't catch every solicitor who's out soliciting without a solicitor's license. And those are offenses that occur out in the open. So yeah, this would be a very difficult law to enforce, and it would be a law that would only be enforced in those extreme situations.
And so speaking of extreme situations, the family that was at Scenic Drive, these were people that had other issues, and they're real people, not just a house that housed a lot of animals. The pictures shown were not just showing a lot of animals, but rather a clear picture of some hoarding challenges that those individuals faced. Unless we're willing to help them, it seems very difficult to say to an individual that's responsibly owning their pets, this is the number you're allowed to have by your government. And so I think we're stepping into an area that, again, we shouldn't be. If they're hosing animal feces to the back of the yard, I think we can do something about that. And they're tying animals onto a zip line in the back of the yard, I think there's issues. But I think placing numbers, that's not what our government's role is. But making sure we enforce strictly the animal welfare rights and neighboring property rights, I think there's better ways to go about that and continuing to press that way. Professionals that I spoke to in the last week, I didn't find one animal professional that viewed this as a positive step for pets or people. Questions came up of, well, how many people can live in a house? How many generations can live in a house? How many gerbils can they have? How many, and again, it was, as I said, the multiple professionals that I spoke to about what a number looks like, they were indignant that it was wrong that we try to place a number. And it kind of then made me think a little bit stronger on that and realizing these people in situations need more help than us telling them how many pets they can own in their family. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cotner. Anybody on council want to weigh in? Councilmember Salvati.
So, I too have given way too much thought to this issue, especially as a non-pet owner. But one of the things that's been mentioned a number of times is the size of the house and how a person in a mansion cannot be responsible for one dog. How and a person in a small house might be able to easily take care of 5 and all that. So my approach ended up being, all right, I don't want to get into any of that. I don't want anybody to be counting their neighbors' dogs to see if they have 6 versus 5 or and at first I went all the way to the I just didn't want this at all because I thought we have other statutes, we have nuisance laws, we have so if the house smells god awful, I mean, I would think that would constitute as a nuisance to the neighbors. If the dogs are barking at all hours of the night, that would be a nuisance to the neighbors. If the dogs are fighting one another on a zip line, basically, that would be animal cruelty. I would think so. There were, my first inclination was, there's other things we're gonna be able to enforce other things. But I went back and forth. I'm like, okay, so do I want nothing, or do I want, or is this, like I talked to Attorney Shook and whatnot. I'm like, is this going to be helpful? One extra helpful thing, and I said, well, if I'm going to support anything with this law, it's got to be a number that above that number is absolutely positively bad. That no one should have more than X number of dogs, period. And I didn't know what that number was. The number I came to that if we actually voted on this legislation that I might be comfortable voting yes, is I said, 10 to 15 dogs and cats. I struggle to see any home in Reynoldsburg being able to have more than 15 or so animals without that raising an alarm to me. So that was the number I came to. That was the number I kind of mentioned to Attorney Shook that I might be supportive of this. I kind of said 10 dogs, 10 cats, no more than 15 of any kind of animal. So I guess that's where I ended up. If we ended up tabling this or not doing it all, I guess I wouldn't be that sad about that either. But if this comes to a vote and that number is somewhere in the 10 to 15, 10 to 20 range, I would probably be supportive of it, but absolutely no lower, because I just don't want people counting. I want to know it's a problem. If this is invoked, we have a problem. So that's where I ended up on this legislation.
Thank you, Councilmember Salvati. You're actually pretty close to where I ended up in this. When I started thinking about numbers, when we talk about scenic drive, I think we can probably all agree 40 is too many. Beyond that, I think here tonight we can probably agree 22 German Shepherds on a rope is probably too many.
But wouldn't 18 on a rope be too many as well?
I think 18 on a rope would be too many, and that's why this is a problem. And I had reached out to Attorney Shook last week, to say, is this something that we really need to do? Because I feel like putting a number on this is just, it'd be subjective, and I don't know I know what my house will hold, but I don't know what anybody else's house will hold. I'm inclined, to say we should pass on this for a little bit, but, Councilmember Baker, looks like you have something on your mind as well.
Well, I was just going to say that putting a number on this is a hard pill to swallow. I mean, it's like if a family wants to have 20 kids. Lord behold, why would you want to have 20 kids? I don't know. Child care's through the roof, and I only got 2. But they are, they're allowed to have 20 kids. However, by law, you have to show that you are responsibly taking care of your children. Some people treat their dogs or cat like a member of the family, which technically they are. And so there should be something that we can do where we're not limiting a person's right to have 10 cats, 10 dogs or whatever, without stepping on their right. However, protecting the animal, the neighbors of wretched smell or what have you. But there's something that has to be done, or hopefully can be done, to where we can find a medium. But as of right now, this legislation obviously needs some more work done to it. And I would agree with you just to hold it or table it until we could come to some sort of consensus. But something does need to be done. Is basically what I'm saying. But I want to make sure we're not stepping on people's right as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Baker. Attorney Shook, part of the conversation you and I had was like, you had mentioned, it's like asking to enforce a speed limit with no speed limit. But in this case, I guess I wonder, and I only caught a little bit of the speaker when I was coming in, but it sounded like they were pointing out a number of other sections in the Animals and Fowl Code that do address, nuisance factors like noise. And when we overhauled the Animals and Fowl chapter a couple years ago, I think 15 minutes of sustained barking is sufficient to trigger a call to the non-emergency line. If I'm not mistaken.
Also a very difficult law to enforce unless
Correct.
someone's going to hold up a recorder for 15
Correct.
minutes. We have, even our easiest laws to enforce, like speeding, because we have an objective number, we have devices that our police officers can use, and people commit that offense out in the open. Even those laws can be difficult to enforce. They're all, in some fashion or another, have their difficulties.
Yeah. I guess I'm wondering, because I think the intention is good, that we don't want to see another house like Scenic Drive, but I don't think, I struggle to put something like that in place when everybody, I think, they knows their financial abilities to care for animals and, the amount of space in their house. Do you have other ideas?
Sure. One thing that we've talked about, and we've talked about this also internally at City Hall, is whether we have a need for an animal control officer, someone who's specially trained in these kinds of situations. And that's an ongoing conversation. I think one of the things that we generally agree on internally is that we don't have a need for a full-time animal control officer, but there may be some way to combine those responsibilities with a code officer, and I think we need, 1 or 2 more code officers anyway. So that is another route that we can obviously take that will increase our enforcement capabilities.
I think I like that idea a little bit better. Mayor?
I've had conversations with Mayor Maggard from Whitehall on that, and that's actually the process that Whitehall uses. Is it's basically a part-time code enforcement, part-time animal control. If we were to add up the number of calls outside of Scenic Drive for animal complaints, we probably have had less than 5 in the last 16 to 18 months. However, there was one today about an issue that was coming across, and there were foxes out there. Now, the video that was shown on social media was really cute, but I don't think that they wanted those foxes around, anyone else. But again, that is something that we're looking at. It's just then it becomes a question of how do you find somebody that is qualified to do that at the same time, which presents a whole other, because it's just not a common thing to have that kind of dual certification.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Begany. My understanding was we had a part-time animal control officer until about 10 years ago when the police department did away with it. And I had asked whenever we did the revision of the animals and fowl chapter, I had asked, this was under the old administration for, exploration into an animal control officer, ideally on a part-time basis. Does anybody else have anything that they want to say on the subject tonight? Yes, Councilmember Lawson Rowe.
One other point I wanted to share, consideration of rescue animals. So some neighbors are rescue lovers, and so they rescue different types of animals. And so that would be something else that we would have to consider in the number and timing and so forth, if at all.
Yeah, and that is something that's put in the latest draft. So there are exemptions that were built into this draft, one for dogs and cats under the age of 6 months, one for dogs and cats that are kept and harbored pursuant to an agreement with a rescue, a shelter, or a humane society, and then another exemption for any dog or cat that is kept or harbored as of the effective date of the ordinance. So those are the three exceptions that were built into the draft that was presented.
Okay. Thank you, Counselor. Do we have anything else from anybody else? I'm going to move that we table this ordinance and have some inquiry into, an animal control officer / code enforcement officer, because I do feel like we've got a pretty comprehensive chapter on animals and fowl, which is not to say that, it shouldn't be subject to amendment or change at some point, but I just feel like a lot of those matters in regard to nuisance and the odor and that sort of thing can be dealt with in what we already have. So I'm going to move that we table this for now.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Lawson Rowe. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And motion carries. This item will be tabled. Next item on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the city auditor to remove equipment from the city's fixed asset list of the police department. Chief Griselle?
Thank you. Yeah, this is the old wagon, paddy wagon that's out there. It's 27 years old, over 75,000 miles. It's been used for various different roles on the department. Some surveillance at one time, but ultimately, recently, it's been a prisoner transport vehicle when we have an extremely resistive, combative, violent person. So it's just really not safe anymore at this point. It's so old. So, thank you.
All right. Do we have any questions or comments from the committee on this legislation? From council? Yes, Councilmember Baker.
Is this the paddy wagon with the old 1970s headlights on it? Look like it's from Police Academy.
Maybe. I haven't seen the front of it because it parks away from me, to be honest. It's got the old logos on it, though.
Yeah.
It's pretty old, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I move that we forward this ordinance to council for a first reading. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Lawson Rowe. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a first reading. Third and final item on the agenda is an ordinance to repeal and replace ordinance number 121-19, authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Equivant for court view software to waive competitive bidding, appropriate funds, and declaring emergency. Attorney Shook or the clerk? Oh, we have our clerk. Hello. Wonderful to see you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Madam President and council members and Mayor. A couple years ago, I had come before council to ask for the mayor to be able to sign the contract for new software for the computers that we have, that we operate all of our court functions on. At the computer software was supposed to have been implemented in 2020. The company Equivant, which runs the court view software, had fallen behind, and then COVID hit. So we didn't get it in time. We do have money that was appropriated that we use for the yearly maintenance that we still have in our budget every year. The only difference is there was an increase, or actually, Madam Chair, you had asked about public access and public access, and also the ability to pay online through the same courtware software program, which we did get a quote on. It will be included in this packet. There was a separate quote for it, though. He separated it, and you will see in the packet that we gave, or the quotes that we included in the packet. The quote expired in November of 2020. We got a revised copy, and there's very little changes to it. The change that he did list was the adding of a hosting fee, which we don't have. We won't be able to host this information on the server here. We won't have a server here. It will be hosted by the cloud, which was recommended by our IT department. And other than that, it's basically the same contract.
Okay. All right. Do we have any questions or comments from the committee? From council? All right. I move that we forward this ordinance to council for a first reading. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Pecorell. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The ordinance will be forwarded to council for first reading. As there are no further business before the Public Safety, Law, and Courts Committee, I return the meeting to President Jenkins.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Public Service and Transportation Committee. Councilmember Strickland, please.
Thank you, Madam President. This is the Public Service and Transportation Committee meeting for June 28, 2021. Members in attendance are Councilmember Cotner, Councilmember Lawson Rowe, Councilmember Pecorell, myself, and President Jenkins. Item number 1, an ordinance to amend Section 1399.5, exemption to vacant property registration of the codified ordinance of the City of Reynoldsburg. Attorney Shook.
Yes, thank you, Chair Strickland. This is a minor change to our vacant property registration ordinance, which for the most part has worked really well for us over the last more than a year since council passed it. This is to give further discretion to the service director who oversees the registration program to grant exemptions where there are no observable exterior code violations, and then there are other circumstances that might warrant an exemption so that someone's property might not be listed on the vacant property registration. We had a couple of situations that had come up through the registration process that would have warranted such an exemption, and we felt it necessary that we give that discretion over to the service director. So that is the only change that we are proposing.
Thank you, Attorney Shook. Are there any questions or comments from the committee on this legislation? Any from council? I move we amend this ordinance to council for a first reading. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pecorell. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a first reading. Item number 2, An ordinance authorizing EMHT to conduct survey, design, engineering, and bidding services for the Police Department West parking lot and appropriating funds therefore. Director Dorman.
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman Strickland. This ordinance, as you know, with council's recess in August, we are trying to get some legislation on the books so we don't have to move forward with any type of emergency legislation in the future. This is in hopes of the CARE funding being released fairly soon, as the auditor spoke of a few months ago, and appropriating those funds in a separate account, which we would then use for actually this project as well as the following one. Some of you, I mean, Councilmember Cotner may be familiar. I know that there's been talk in the past as well about this project. In the cities I've worked for, it's fairly odd to have an open parking lot for the police vehicles and their personal vehicles. Typically, as they're coming and going, bringing their equipment to the cruisers and back and forth, whether they're going to the shooting range and practicing and going back and putting back things in the cruisers. Also, there's a sally port that connects to the police department through this parking lot as well. What we're looking at is to get a design for a fence that would go around this parking lot with some access gates that would be controlled by the prox readers that we currently use for their building as well. So there'd not be software additions, but we would do a fence around the perimeter. And there's also a need to expand the parking lot. Chief Baker and Deputy Chief, we've talked about this as well. Now that they're almost at full staff, which is great, there is a need for additional parking spaces. We'd also like to move some of the city's vehicles over there too that are not currently secured during the evening hours as well, that are parked behind City Hall here. Once again, this would be for designing this perimeter fence around the parking lot, as well as the expanded parking lot, which would be to the north, sort of towards that Parks and Rec little space there that's not utilized by the Parks and Rec Department. It would also include another major improvement here would be a carport. And I provided some photos just as an example, nothing that we're proposing, but it gives you just kind of idea what we're talking about. The great thing about that is it keeps the cruisers under cover during the winter months. They don't have to go out and shovel them, warm them up, de-ice the cars. And also we'd have some security lighting under there as well. So.
Thank you, Director Dorman. Are there any questions or comments from the committee on this legislation? Any from council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a first reading. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Lawson Rowe. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a first reading. Item number 3, an ordinance authorizing EMHT to conduct survey, design, engineering, and bidding services for a traffic signal interconnect and preemption system along the Main Street corridor, Bryce to Wagner Roads, and appropriating funds therefore. Director Dorman.
Actually, I'll let the mayor speak on this one.
Yes, Chair Strickland and members of council, President. This comes to you from a number of different concerns that community has expressed for a number of years. Apparently, there is traffic in Reynoldsburg. I did not know if you were aware of this. And occasionally it gets backed up, and that doesn't include when we're actually having construction on Main Street. So in anticipation of the America Recovers Act funding coming in, I engaged in some brief conversations with EMH&T, our city engineer, to discuss the possibility of different ways that we can improve traffic flow in the city. And what they came up with is basically, without getting too technical, wireless radio transmitters that will actually connect all the traffic lights from Bryce Road to Wagner Road, that would allow for easier flow of traffic in and out of the city based on the time of day. So if you're, leaving Reynoldsburg in the morning, it's going to be a lot more easy flow out, towards 270. Same coming in the other way. In addition to this, conversations with Chief Sharps from the Truro Township Fire Department have come about with what is known as a preemption system. Basically, what this does is if you've seen, as we've all pulled over to the side as emergency vehicles are coming past us, the idea is that the fire trucks and emergency service vehicles could actually click on something technologically to turn all the lights green as they approach an intersection, which improves safety functions for all fire and EMS services. So this would actually be something that could be the difference between life and death, in all honesty, when it comes to the timing of trying to get through traffic. It reduces any kind of chances of collision between cars coming in another direction that may not be paying as much attention to the cross traffic. So between those two things, to improve everything on Main Street as well as to the safety functions, this was a perfect use for the America Recovers Act funding. And given the amount of construction that is going on Main Street, including the paving, we figured if we're messing everything up now, let's go ahead and keep going with it and get all of this stuff done at the same time. If passed by council, the traffic counts and the study would begin sometime after school starts, so they can get as accurate of a count as possible to work on the timing and things of that nature. And then from there, it just depends on process and, how much the time it takes to get the materials in and put it up. But it would be something that we could get done this year.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee on this legislation? From council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a first reading. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pacquiao. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a first reading. Item number 4, an ordinance authorizing MHT to conduct survey, design, engineering, and bidding services for the Graham Road Multi-Use Trail Sidewalk Extension, Palmer Road to Livingston Avenue project, and appropriating funds therefore. Director Dorman.
Okay. I think we've talked about this a little as we were working on the budget the end of last year. We talked about reusing our sidewalk funds that we kind of been sitting there for a few years and finding these, what we call, missing links within the city where we have sidewalk that goes to nowhere and then it picks up somewhere else. This was a project that I know we've talked about in the past. I know you council has talked about this. This would basically be the sidewalk on the east side of Graham, right in front of Livingston House, and then it would cross the creek and then go up to the Five Corners. We had some great conversations with the Franklin County Engineers Office. I think it was late last year, early this year as well. They control that bridge. However, they've been willing to, in kind, do the design work for the bridge crossing as well as the construction. They can do that work in-house. They have their own bridge crews. If you're lucky enough to maybe get ahead of the schedule, they're willing to do some of that work occasionally. So that'll save the city quite a bit of money. Actually, the crossing is probably the most challenging part of this project. EMH&T, though, this will basically authorize EMH&T to go out and start doing the design work. They need to go out and do some survey work. We've agreed to share that data with the county engineers that they can then use to develop their plans with a goal of hopefully going into design, hopefully sometime next year.
Thank you, Director Dorman. Are there any questions from the committee on this legislation?
Not a question, I have a statement. So thank you, because that has been a big thing like that. The bridge has been very difficult for people, especially to go because they need to get in the road and get out. I think this is an excellent thing. Thank you for bringing this up.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Any from council?
I'd like to say something. This is a long time coming because I know me and the council member, Brian, has been barking up this tree for a long time about getting sidewalks and from Palmer all the way down to Livingston because there's businesses over there and obviously there's residential and we have seen increased foot traffic. And on top of that, safety. You don't want somebody walking out in the middle of a street because they can't walk across the bridge or walk on this little dirt side of the road. So I just want to say I'm glad to see this is happening and kudos.
Yeah, I think, an important thing too is we start to program that park more in the Livingston House more. Recently, we had the Makers and Artist and Makers Market, which was very well attended, great day for that. The concerts, eventually there'll be a need where people, the parking lot's not going to be big enough and maybe they'll want to park off-site somewhere and walk. And that provides them that ability, or just go to the park. The Metro Park is such a key aspect in that area too. We want to provide that connectivity. So.
Any other questions? I would like to personally thank you, Director Dorman, for collaborating with the engineers. And, everyone is really coming together and starting those conversations. So thank you so much for doing that. I move we forward this ordinance to council for a first reading. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pacquiao. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a first reading. Item number 5, an ordinance authorizing MHT to conduct survey, design, engineering, and bidding services for the Hill Road Methodist Cemetery improvements and appropriating funds therefor. Director Dorman.
Yes, so I know we had some correspondence from someone from the public about this earlier. I've done a few projects with cemeteries in my past and historic cemeteries as well. If anyone's familiar with this, this is the cemetery that sits up on the hill next to the VFW. Right now, there's no fence around it. There is a little fence kind of around some plots in the middle, however, nothing on the exterior portion. You know, as the city, you know, looks at development that will occur to the north of this site, as well as, you know, the improvements we want to do to Quarry Park, as well as along Wagner Road, we want to make this, you know, a nice, attractive area. Fences, my background's actually in landscape architecture and horticulture, and we were in college. When we went to go study plants, we walked cemeteries because that's about the only place where trees typically grow in their natural state and never get touched. They plant them there and they grow, and the only thing that happens is maybe they get trimmed. But cemeteries, you know, are a great place. People go there and they'll walk their dogs. We go there, like I said, and study them. It's a nice little place. You don't want to make it, I don't think so, it feels like a fortress or a prison yard, but it's definitely nice to have some security around that. That just kind of defines the area. And I think that's what this will do, but we also want to make it fit in with the character of the cemetery, being a historic cemetery. You know, whether that's a powder-coated aluminum fence or a wooden fence with some columns and a gate. I don't know how that looks right now, but that's something as we get through this design we'll gladly share with council. The pictures, once again, were just more for reference. But as we get through this process, we'll definitely share that with council. And there's even the option to incorporate some lights on the columns, you know, that match kind of a time period that just provides some lighting too as well, if we ever needed to. So.
All right, are there any questions from the committee? From council? So I know we did hear some information about maybe some vandalism happening at this particular location. Have anything happened, you know, at this particular location at all?
I'm not aware of any. I don't know if the mayor is.
I had conversations with Chief Baker and the deputy chief earlier today. They cannot find anything within recent memory of anything there. However, the resident in question, Mary Stutz, who was very passionate about this and brought this to my attention earlier this year, said that this past winter, that hill is typically can be used for sledding, which is great, but she feels that there were probably a few times where the sledding was not the only thing occurring, and that perhaps that there were too many people in the area that might have been doing damage to the headstones themselves. Now, whether or not that was reported in or not, or if they found any evidence or not, it's not the case. But the reality is a fence around it, you know, is something that would be needed just for the protection of the historical value of everything.
Absolutely. Yes, Councilwoman Lawson-Rowe.
More of a question to be educated. Please tell me the difference between this cemetery, this historical cemetery that we're discussing, and the other historical cemetery that is there on 256 behind that strip plaza. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm not familiar with that.
I'm familiar with this. As
So
far
the
as
reason I'm asking is because that cemetery is fenced, and I happened to be over there walking the other day because I wanted to explore, and I could only access, residents, we can only access that cemetery during business hours, and we must contact Parks and Rec. So my question is, what's the difference between the two cemeteries?
I think that there's been some confusion in the past on whose jurisdiction this particular cemetery belonged to. I was actually under the impression originally that it was Truro Township's area, given that there's a lot of Truro Township in that particular part of Wagner Road. However, we've come to find out, obviously, that that is not the case. I would like to think that this is just something that has probably slipped through the cracks, and at some point in time in the past 30, 40 years, it was turned over to the city, and then all of a sudden, people just kind of forgot about it, and we thought it was Turo's. Turo's thought it was ours, and ultimately it was ours, and that's why we're looking to address it. But the other one, specifically, I'm familiar with that particular location, so it would probably be run under the same scenario where if you wanted to access it at certain times, like Mary Stutz had mentioned in her email, contacting Parks and Recs. But I don't believe that we've had too many requests for that particular cemetery, but I'll double check with our director tomorrow.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a first reading. Is there a second? Is there a
I'll
second?
second, so we can continue the conversation.
Second by Councilmember Lawson Rowe. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a first reading. Item number 6, an ordinance to accept an unrecorded deed of utility easement, 24 square feet, from Myersco Builders LLC and declaring an emergency. This legislation is being requested as a single read emergency. Attorney Shook.
I think I'm going to go ahead and defer to the service director on this issue.
Yeah, I can go ahead. So this has been as you know, this is a part of the Main Street Phase 1 project, which is from Davidson Drive down to Jackson, that we are going to be starting probably the week after the 4th. We've asked our contractor to kind of wait off till after the holidays and get everything kind of buttoned up. It's been enough of a headache right now with Columbia Gas out there, and then we had the demolition of the old Vic's Pizza as well, so it's been kind of chaotic out there, and we appreciate everyone bearing with us as we do that. And just a little update on that too as well. ODOT is pretty much done with the paving in the Licking County portion through our district. The Franklin County portion will start the end of July, and it'll be nighttime work. We will put that on our website, but since we're kind of talking about this quarter, I think it's a good time to mention that. But ODOT will be repaving the Franklin County Route 40 Main Street portion, beginning, I think, July 27th was the date I recall, but it will be nighttime work. So hopefully by the time you get in your cars and drive to work in the morning, they'll be off the road and everything will be cleared up. So the next items, basically every item that's left here, 6 through I think it's 11, are all relating to pieces of property that the city needed to do this project. And the one we're talking about right now is, you'll probably know it as more as the Visiting Angels building. That's the Visiting Angels site. And there's an old signal there. It's suspended by a wire. Most of our traffic signals in the city have what we call a mast arm and a signal pole there. It's held up by it overhangs the intersection. When we redo this street, we're actually going to put one of those signals in here so it will match the rest of the streetscape that you see along Main Street. We are also widening that intersection to allow better turning movements onto Lancaster. So what this does is this allows us to put that traffic signal back behind the sidewalk and on the property.
Are there any questions from the committee? From council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a single read emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pacquiao. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a single read emergency. Item number 7, an ordinance to accept an unrecorded deed of utility easement 24 square feet from Robert E. Kenyon Jr. and declaring an emergency. This legislation is being requested as a single read emergency.
And once again, so this is a property just to the west of Visiting Angels. It used to be an antique store, I think, back in the day. It's currently for sale, next to the veterinary hospital there. And once again, this is for the other signal pole that will actually be pushed back behind the sidewalk. And I also want to clarify that items 6 and 7 are easements, which means that the property owner still retains the property. However, we have the rights to get in there and put our facilities in there.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Any from council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a single read emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pacquiao. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a single read emergency. Item number 8, an ordinance to accept an unrecorded right-of-way deed, 0.003 acres, from Kevin Patel LLC and declaring an emergency. This legislation is being requested as a single read emergency.
Okay,
Any other
so this is a property, it's just to the east. I know it's not Blacklick, it's the dentist office that is on the, that would be the southwest corner of Jackson and Main Street. Once again, another signal pole goes there, gets pushed back behind the wider sidewalk that we're installing for pedestrian access. And that's pretty much it with this one as well.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? From council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a single read emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Council Member Lawson Rowe. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a single read emergency. Item number 9, an ordinance to accept an unrecorded right-of-way deed, 0.014 acres from Jack and LaShawn Sun and declaring an emergency. This legislation is being requested as a single read emergency.
Yes, this property we're all familiar with as the Happy Dragon. The city was hopeful that we would have had the transaction done prior to, however, given the contingency of the contract and allowing Mr. Jack to get out, 60 days, I think, to get out of the property and remove his equipment and things, we needed him to sign it. Right now, AEP is wanting to get out there and get this pole relocated because, like I said, we have a contractor that's like ready to go right now. However, they cannot go until we get this pole moved. So we moved forward and actually had them sign this document now, even though knowing hopefully within the next several weeks we'll transfer that property fully into our name. So.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? From council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a single read emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Lawson Rowe. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a single read emergency. Item number 10, an ordinance to accept an unrecorded right-of-way deed, 0.005 acres from Trivium Reynoldsburg Development, LLC, and declaring an emergency. This legislation is being requested as a single read emergency.
This is a property on the southeast corner of Jackson Street, Maine. It was at the Methodist Church, I believe. Recently sold, if you're familiar, there was a for sale sign out there, and that recently changed hands. Trivium is a new owner of that. Once again, this is for another traffic signal that goes towards the back, as well as a traffic control cabinet that has a battery backup system. One thing I think I should mention too, and that the mayor, when we were talking about earlier about the traffic system, we're trying to get all of our traffic signals to have a battery backup system. That way the police, when we have a storm and we lose power, they don't have to use unnecessary manpower out there to do traffic control at the intersections. So part of this signal upgrade would also include doing a battery backup system in there.
That sounds good. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? From council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for.
Madam Chair?
I'm sorry. I didn't see.
Just real quick, since we're on the topic of traffic lights and stuff, the walk signal, and I know I've said this numerous times, but since we're on it, I just want to jog your memory again about the walk signal that's over there in front of Prost in the mural. Is there any talks or discussions about switching that out to get something that's a little more effective, like what we have
Yeah.
on Livingston?
Well, I think when we redo this project, so obviously you have to understand that curb line is coming out to the street more. That street's being narrowed. Those signs will be out in traffic more. You're going to see them. They're going to be a lot more visible, and the lanes are going to be narrower. I think that'll help. I think when we restripe that too, it'll help in defining that median a lot better. It's going to be a curb. It's going to be very, I think you're going to notice everything with the trees and the landscaping. The feel that's going to make people just go slower. I think, and you're going to see that, and that effect will happen with the signal being more visible as well, because it'll get pushed out further by about 5 feet
Okay.
into the road.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a single read emergency. Is there a second? That's what I'm doing now.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. It's getting late, but that's okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pecoraro. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a single read emergency. Item number 11, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a right-of-way deed 0.017 acres to the city of Reynoldsburg to be filed with the Franklin County Recorder's Office and declaring an emergency. This legislation is being requested as a single read emergency.
So this is area we know as Memorial Plaza. I know it sounds kind of odd, but yes, we have to dedicate our own property to ourselves for the right-of-way, because currently it's just the plaza. But this will actually be dedicated right-of-way, which will increase the turning movements and widen the radius of that intersection.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? From council? I move we forward this ordinance to council for a single read emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Lawson Rowe. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. This ordinance will be forwarded to council for a single read emergency. As there is no further business for the Public Service and Transportation Committee, I return the meeting back to you, President Jenkins.
Thank you. Next, we'll have a report from Finance and Administration Committee, Councilmember Savati.
Thank you, President Jenkins. This is the Finance and Administration Committee meeting for June 28th, 2021. Members in attendance are Councilmember Baker, Councilmember Bryant, Councilmember Strickland, myself, and President Jenkins. First item on the agenda is an ordinance to amend the personal procedure manual regarding fleet safety policy and medical marijuana. This ordinance has returned to council for an amendment to add the Juneteenth holiday. Director Bowler, probably
Yeah.
pretty simple.
Good evening, Chairman Savati, President Jenkins, and the committee. As you know, a couple weeks ago, I was here asking for those changes to the PPM. Since the federal government has now deemed Juneteenth a federal holiday, we wanted to add that to the PPM as a recognized holiday for city employees.
Okay.
Be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee on this legislation? Councilmember Baker?
Just real quick, will this substitute for another one on the calendar, or is this just an addition?
An addition at this
Okay,
point. Mhm.
thank you.
All right, any other comments from council?
I just would like to publicly recognize the City of Respect for recognizing this holiday. Since it is under the umbrella of the Emancipation Proclamation, it's one of the most important events here our country has witnessed in American history, and the Juneteenth story just highlights the sub-story of the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation. And celebrating Juneteenth as a national holiday reminds us how far we've come, and it also reminds us how much further we should go, we need to go. And it shares the story of slavery, of the slavery era did not end when the Emancipation Proclamation was handed down. And it shares the story also of our ancestors and offers those untold and unshared stories and the progression of American history. Thank you.
All right, any comments other than that? All right, I move that we amend this ordinance to add the language to include Juneteenth as a city holiday. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Strickland. Is there any further discussion?
No, but I'd like to say thank you to the mayor for putting this forward.
Thank you.
Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. So now I move we forward this amended ordinance to council for a second reading. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Bryant. Any additional discussion? All right, seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. This amended ordinance will be forwarded to council for its second read. And that concludes business for the Finance and Administration Committee, and I return the meeting to President Jenkins.
Thank you. Next, we have consent agenda for emergency adoption. Items 11A through L are part of a consent agenda. These ordinances stand for an emergency adoption unless someone wants to remove an item for further discussion. Council will move forward for a vote and approval.
Council President,
Yes.
would you please remove item K to be read individually?
Yes, we will remove item K. Would the clerk please read items A through J and L?
Item A, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Strasser Paving for the construction services for the 2021 waterline replacement project and declaring an emergency. B, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with EMH&T for construction inspection services for the 2021 waterline replacement project and declaring an emergency. C, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Visu Sewer, Inc. for the 2021 sewer improvement project and declaring an emergency. Item D, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with EMH&T for construction inspection services for the 2021 sewer line replacement project and declaring an emergency. E, an ordinance to establish separate funds and accountability for federal program authorized by the American Rescue Act of 2021 and declaring an emergency.
May I have a motion to?
Hold up. F, I'm still going. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. F, a resolution adopting the tax budget for the city of Reynoldsburg, Ohio for the fiscal year beginning 2022 and declaring an emergency. G, an ordinance to accept the unrecorded deed of utility easement 24 square feet from Meyerson Co. Builders LLC and declaring an emergency. H, an ordinance to accept the unrecorded deed of utility easement 24 square feet from Robert E. Kenyon Jr. and declaring an emergency. I, an ordinance to accept an unrecorded right-of-way deed 0.003 acres from Kevin Patel LLC and declaring an emergency. J, an ordinance to accept an unrecorded right-of-way deed 0.014 acres from Jack and LaShawn Son and declaring an emergency. L, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a right-of-way deed 0.017 acres to the city of Reynoldsburg to be filed with the Franklin County Recorder's Office and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve these ordinances A through J and L? Councilmember Baker, may I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Strickland, would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Bryant?
Aye.
Councilmember Strickland?
Aye.
Councilmember Salvati?
Aye.
Councilmember Pecoro?
Aye.
Councilmember Lawson Rowe?
Aye.
Councilmember Cotner?
Aye.
And Councilmember Baker.
Aye.
Madam, that was 7-0.
Thank you. These ordinances have been approved with 7-0 vote. Would the clerk please read ordinance K?
An ordinance to accept the unrecorded right-of-way deed 0.005 acres from Trivium Reynoldsburg Development LLC and declaring an emergency.
May I have a motion to approve this ordinance? Councilmember Bryant, may I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Strickland, would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Bryant?
Aye.
Councilmember Strickland?
Aye.
Councilmember Salvati?
Aye.
Councilmember Pecoro?
Aye.
Councilmember Lawson Rowe?
Aye.
Councilmember Cotner?
Abstain.
Councilmember Baker.
Aye.
That is 6-0-1. It passes 6-0 with one abstention.
These ordinances are approved with 6 affirmative votes and 1 abstain and no negative votes. Next, we'll have consent agenda for a first reading. Items 12A through J are part of a consent agenda. These ordinances stand for a first reading unless someone wants to remove an item for further discussion. Council will move forward for a first reading. Would the clerk please read items 12A through J?
Item A, an ordinance to amend Chapter 11 Planning and Zoning Code for the City of Reynoldsburg, Ohio. B, B, an ordinance establishing Chapter 785, medical marijuana facilities of the codified ordinances for the city of Reynoldsburg. C, an ordinance to amend Section 505.17, nuisance conditions prohibited, limiting the number of that has been removed. Item C has been removed. D, an ordinance authorizing the city auditor to remove equipment from the city's fixed asset list for the police department. E, an ordinance to repeal and replace ordinance number 121-19, authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Equivent for court view software to waive competitive bidding, appropriate funds, and declaring an emergency. F, an ordinance to amend Section 1399.05, exemptions to vacant property registration of the codified ordinances for the city of Reynoldsburg. G, an ordinance authorizing EMH&T to conduct survey, design, engineering, and bidding services for the police department, west parking lot, and appropriating funds therefor. H, an ordinance authorizing EMH&T to conduct survey, design, engineering, and billing services for the traffic signal interconnect and preemptive system along the Main Street corridor, Bryce to Wagoner Roads, and appropriating funds. I, an ordinance authorizing EMH&T to conduct survey, design, engineering, and bidding services for the Graham Road Multi-Use Trail Sidewalk Extension, Palmer Road to Livingston Avenue project, and appropriating funds therefor. And J, an ordinance authorizing EMH&T to conduct survey, design, engineering, and bidding services for the Hill Road Methodist Cemetery improvements and appropriating funds therefor.
These ordinances stand for a first reading with the exception of ordinance C has been removed. Next, we'll move on to a consent agenda for a second reading. Items 13A through D are part of a consent agenda. These ordinances stand for a second reading unless someone wants to remove an item for further discussion. Council will move forward for a second reading. Would the clerk please read items 13A through D?
Item A, an ordinance to amend Chapter 373 Bicycles and Motorcycles of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Reynoldsburg to remove bicycle licensing requirements. B, an ordinance to authorize the purchase of 2,000 MXU meters from Census for the upgrade program and waive competitive bidding. C, an ordinance to certify nuisance abatement costs with 54 Scenic Road in the City of Reynoldsburg. D, an ordinance to amend the Personnel Procedure Manual regarding fleet safety policy, medical marijuana, and Juneteenth holiday.
These ordinances stand for a second reading. Next, we have consent agenda for a third reading. Items 14A through E are part of a consent agenda. These ordinances stand for a third reading and approval unless someone wants to remove an item for further discussion. Council will move forward with a vote on these ordinances. Would the clerk please read items 14A through E?
A, an ordinance to approve the final plat plan for Spring Hill Farm Development, Section 2, Part A. B, an ordinance to approve the final plat plan for Spring Hill Farm Development, Section 2, Part B. C, an ordinance authorizing the clerk of council to certify nuisance costs for 2020 for collection by the Franklin County Auditor. D, an ordinance authorizing the clerk of council to certify costs for 2020 for collection by the Licking County Auditor. And E, an ordinance appropriating funds for the Bryce Road Main Street TIF for agency transfer to allow for payment to the Reynoldsburg City School District.
May I have a motion to approve these ordinances? Councilmember Baker, may I have a second? Councilmember Savati. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Bryant?
Aye.
Councilmember Strickland?
Aye.
Councilmember Salvati?
Aye.
Councilmember Pacquiao?
Aye.
Councilmember Lawson Rowe?
Aye.
Councilmember Cotner?
Aye.
And Councilmember Baker. Madam President, that was 7-0.
These ordinances are approved with 7 affirmative votes and no negative votes. Next, we have other council matters. Does anyone on council have any further items that you would like to discuss this evening? Councilmember Baker?
I dropped the ball at the last meeting, but I want to make sure I got it in today. My traditional thank you to all the first responders, the nurses, the doctors, the teachers in this pandemic. We're still in a pandemic, but it's ending. So I just want to make sure I got that out the way. And I also want to thank the African American Wellness Walk for being at the Pride Festival, offering health screenings, diabetes screenings, and stuff like that. So just want to put that out there.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other items they'd like to discuss?
And Councilmember Baker, your dance in the farmer's market.
Okay, so, I'm not even gonna put myself on the spot.
Is it on video?
Yeah, he put it on
YouTube?
video.
Is it on
Yeah,
YouTube?
it's on YouTube.
Yes, Councilmember Lawson Rowe.
Yes, I'd like to personally and publicly congratulate Councilman Paccarel for completing his very first 5K at Reynoldsburg Juneteenth. And our littlest competitor, Alex Shook, for completing his very first 5K in baseball cleats because his baseball game was rained out. So he decided to run the 5K with his dad. Congratulations.
Who won?
I think Judge Jessica was the first female. I'm not sure who the first male was.
Okay.
But everybody's a winner. If you run the 5K, you register, everybody wins.
Right.
You get a medal, and I get a medal.
You,
Do we have any other items that you would like to discuss? Upcoming meetings, there's a schedule for our upcoming council, BZBA, and Planning Commission meetings. Our next council meeting is Monday, July the 12th, 2021, at 6:30 PM. And if there's any other business that anyone needs to discuss this evening, our meeting is adjourned, and the time is now 9:18.